Our external health is a reflection of our internal health. And another thing that to keep in mind is our detoxification and elimination. So things like all skin conditions like eczema and acne can be a product from having high toxins in the body and them not eliminating properly.
The other child that I saw was actually a baby, and we do see lots of babies with eczema in the clinic.
A lot.
And I know this is going to absolutely pop off with it being a risk and exposure site, but this mum thought that she was doing everything right with her birth experience, and she was breastfed and all of that. So she was actually born into water. So she was a home water birth where you're exposed to, instead of the sterile hospital environment, you're exposed to the environment and you're born into water. So
welcome back to another week of Balanced Beings Uncut, where we talk about health, wellness, and everything in between.
Yes, we do.
So today we're going to be talking about eczema and all the triggers. Eczema is one of the things in the clinic that we see, and it's probably the top 3 conditions we see in children the most. So we'd probably see about, 80%. I would say we'd probably see about 60 to 70 children a week with eczema in the clinic, which is a crazy stat. So we obviously know a lot of triggers and pretty much everything there is to know about eczema. Also worth mentioning that there's so many different triggers. So a lot of us do not enjoy treating eczema, even though we do treat eczema quite extensively, because it's such a hard thing to pinpoint. And the reason is, we'll talk about the triggers now if you want to get started, but there's gut microbiome impacts eczema because of the bacterial overgrowth and parasites in there, but then also keeping in mind that there's inflammation in the stomach that can trigger it, the parasites, bacteria. Then what we've also got is celiac disease. We've also got allergies,
heavy metals.
We've also got allergies and food intolerances, which come from bacterial overgrowth in the stomach, which we'll talk about why. Stomach lining damage, nutritional deficiencies, heavy metals.
External allergies as well.
External allergies. We've got gene defects like MTHFR impacting detoxification routes, causing the eczema. We've got food intolerances like histamine oxalates, salicylates.
Just to name a handful.
So that's why it's such a difficult thing to treat. Also mold. So we're going to talk a bit more in detail about eczema today and some triggers and some foods to look out for, and giving you guys some handful tips to take home so that you guys can look at the triggers for your eczema and your kids' eczema. But I'm going to let Madison take the floor and talk a bit more about food intolerances and how you can look out for that and how food intolerances occur and start to begin with.
Alrighty, perfect. So keep me on track here. I'm going to go through gluten, celiac, covering that, and then we'll go through a few of the other not so well-known ones. So celiac disease is genetic. So looking through the lines of a gene test, it shows you if you carry those genes to switch it on or off. So just because you've got that gene doesn't mean that you'll end up with celiac disease. So celiac can be triggered on autoimmune through a really stressful circumstance, stressful time. You can be born with celiac disease. I've seen children in the clinic who were undiagnosed celiac, and that was picked up at under 1 as well.
I've had clients have also had autoimmune-based bacteria in the stomach that's actually caused an onset of the celiac disease as well, because autoimmune-based bacteria that can trigger autoimmune conditions can cause celiac too.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to quickly sidetrack about genes in a bit more detail is the reason we love doing gene tests, which we do in the clinic, is because it shows us all the different genes that we could activate. It doesn't, like epigenetics, it doesn't mean we're going to have these conditions, but it shows us where to put efforts into preventing so we don't end up with heaps of conditions for children and for adults, like cancers, cardiovascular risk, that type of thing.
Yeah. The gene test also tells you if you're lactose intolerant or if you're tolerant, and lactose can be a huge driver of eczema as well, and dairy intolerance, dairy sensitivities. So these are more of the foods that we're looking at through a gut microbiome. Do you have low secretory IgA? Do you have different impacts coming through there because of that damage to the gut lining? Celiac disease, we can see gluten sensitivity picked up on a gut microbiome as well. So this can drive a lot of inflammation, worsening skin presentation. In our previous podcast, we spoke about receptor sites and these getting blocked by different heavy metals. So what we look at for kids, iron, zinc, vitamin E, Vitamin D, similar presentation. So receptor site inflammation then closes off that receptor site. So where you've got a much larger open receptor site, if there's if it's anti-inflammatory, that inflammation then closes it off. So there's nutrients to support skin healing and skin regeneration. That target is a lot smaller, which means if you're flooding the body with these certain nutrients, they're still not going to be recepted and taken in and used and utilized. You got to down-regulate that inflammation first. So inflammation's a really good key marker to start with gut health and also eczema and skin presentation as well. A few other food sensitivities, we've got things like salicylates, oxalates, and histamines as well. So this is really beneficial to understand these certain foods and certain triggers, because some of these can overlap as well. And with eczema, sometimes it's not a clean cut just this. Sometimes it can be celiac and oxalates. Sometimes it can be celiac
The
and
problem that we
histamine.
have in the eczema clinic, in the balance based clinic with eczema,
Gets an eczema clinic.
is the fact I've never seen a child with eczema with just one cause. I've seen a child with eczema with generally 3 causes, of course, triggering it, and that's what you've got to remember. It's not always generally one thing. It's a combination of things, which is why it's caused this presentation.
We've got low beneficial bacteria paired with inflammatory histamine producing bacteria and low levels of oxalates.
Yep.
Where would you start? There's so many different starting points. That's why test, don't guess, especially with eczema, and that's, I think, why we get the most amazing outcomes with eczema, is because we are testing based. We're not going in with herbs to anti-inflammatory support the skin and then not look at those underlying root causes, because then you will get an eczema flare. Once you...
Without not knowing why.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing to think about is, again, obviously, if you guys think about anything that I specialise in and treat day in and day out, it's microbiome. So I'm obviously going to relate every single condition that exists to the microbiome. And so I'm going to do that today.
This is Brooke's segue to the microbiome.
So with our microbiome, we actually have different types of bacteria. We think about streptococcus, we think about staph, we think of staph. Staphylococcus.
Staph in the gut.
And Protavella, Klebsiella citrobacter, they all have
histamine releasing.
Not just histamine,
LPS.
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay. Good luck.
Okay. So we have got different. We have microbiome in the stomach, and there's different types of bacteria, from Protavella to Staphylococcus to Streptococcus. Is that how you say Staphylococcus?
Yeah, it's not Steph, so you got it right.
Streptococcus, Klebsiella citrobacter, they all release different things when they're in the body. They have a byproduct that they produce. So we have things, types of bacteria that can increase histamine production. We have ones that increase IgE production that then cause allergies. I treat kids with allergies in the microbiome in the microbiome clinic.
I think you need an eczema clinic and a microbiome.
I treat kids with allergies in the clinic, and they'll become no longer allergic to the food just through working with the microbiome, and I work alongside allergists to retest and find that. And it's honestly another thing that I love treating so much, because it's awesome and we get such amazing results. And I can go through that case breakdown, and we have amazing reviews with that as well. But going back to this, again, allergies, intolerances, again, what are they caused by? Different types of bacteria in the stomach.
Yeah. Like
Oxalobacter is then impacts oxalate clearance and things like that. So again, microbiome treatment is key for even things like eczema. You can go now, sorry.
I was going to say, and then once you graduate the microbiome clinic, then you can come to the balance being clinic. But seriously. So oxalates and histamines, these are foods that not a lot of people know. Not a lot of people have heard of oxalates. A lot of histamines coming out. It's a bit of a hot word at the moment. So I do come across people knowing histamines. Lots of people know salicylates, and I do see different forms come through saying salicylate intolerance. So salicylates, histamines, and oxalates, these can overlap, and they're typically conned as the good food. They are good food, and just because they're good food doesn't mean that they're bad food for you, but they are not good food for your eczema condition and different conditions. So oxalates is also linked with ASD as well, and low oxalobacter in the gut is one of the key signs to see if you've got disrupted breakdown of oxalates. So low oxalobacter, you need that oxalobacter to actually degenerate and break down and synthesize oxalates. So a key marker that I see of oxalate intolerance in the clinic, specifically with babies, children in nappies that are eating food. So what do children kind of go to once they stop having expensive formula? They go on to
breast milk.
punnets of berries
Oxalates.
daily.
Yep.
So changing stool, and if you're seeing blueberry skins coming out through the stool, so blueberries are quite high in oxalates. Cooking oxalates helps to break them down and have the body more able to synthesize these. So if you think of a blueberry muffin, can you take that blueberry out whole when you bake a blueberry muffin? Or eat a blueberry muffin? No. So it's like it's broken down in there. It's degenerated that oxalate. You're not seeing that blueberry skin. You're just seeing the purple of it. So blueberries is a really easy one to understand with that. So other foods that are high in oxalates are things like sweet potato. I don't often see many people eating that raw.
Carrot though.
Carrot is high oxalate as well. So a lot of foods that I'm asking for when I'm screening in our initial consultation to see if oxalates is an issue here, because oxalates, low oxalobacter is then also a potential sign of molds and mold being present. So if there's blueberries undigested in the stool, carrots undigested in the stool, I'm starting to question if there is a mold exposure within there as well. So low oxalate diet, this just has to be a reduction. So this doesn't normally have to be a complete clearance of oxalates, which is, it's beneficial in that sense then. So reducing these down, I had a client with tinea and she was vegetarian. So foods high in oxalates, blueberries, spinach, soy, these are a lot of her nutritional stores that she was using for antioxidants, iron and protein, and just swaps from dairy. So she had to actually reduce these, and mushrooms are as well. So she reduced these and the tinea cleared. She was also at a part of the protocol where I expected it to clear as well. So was it where we were there, but I definitely won't overlook oxalates.
So talk to me a bit more about if someone has oxalates, what you would do for treatment long term so that they can look at reintroduction.
So oxalates,
if that is something that you can do.
It's, a lot of people have heard about taking antibiotics, it wipes out entire strains of bacteria. Oxalates is one of those strains. Oxalobacter, thank you. Oxalobacter is one of those strains that 1 or 2 courses of antibiotics and a little bit of mold exposure can completely diminish your oxalobacter within the gut. So once this bacteria is gone, it is then crucially hard, very, very hard to actually get this up. And if we do, it's not normally in the great proliferation of the amounts to actually be able to break these down as efficiently as possible. Once again, it's a reduction. So when we're looking at in the clinic, if we're saying go on a low oxalate diet, it doesn't necessarily mean wipe out every single oxalate within there, because there's low, medium and high as well. So I normally just say pick 2 or 3 of the highest oxalates that you're consuming, reduce these down, and then we start, the body's then under less trouble. So these are foods that release, they have oxalates to protect them. So blueberries, if anybody's tried to grow blueberries, they're notoriously hard to grow. So oxalates are released to protect themselves against predators and bugs. So then what are we doing as we're eating them? They're trying to protect themselves from being broken down, and that's doing a disservice to your body as well if you've got that low oxalobacter.
If you've got low oxalobacter though, only in that.
Yeah,
in that
so
respect.
A lot of people also have really good levels of oxalobacter, but this can impact things like bowel motion, clearance, can impact constipation, ASD. Oxalates is connected to a lot of different things as well. So oxalates build up as within the body, and then they come through, you can notice a gritty, sandy stool. So with kids, if you're wiping and you're noticing blueberry seeds, even though they haven't had blueberries, that's a good way of understanding that sandiness and that grittiness of the stool. And then, yeah, so that's where they're coming out through clearance. And then we're seeing things, if they're left too long and you're consuming those and you don't have that oxalobacter to break those down, we then see these oxalates build into kidney stones, and that's when you start having kidney stones as an adult. So if you've got low levels as a child, we can get those up minimally, but then it's still going to be something long term where you're limiting that. So instead of having a punnet of blueberries each day, making that punnet last a week to reduce that, cooking those carrots, not having raw carrots, blanching the spinach, cooking spinach into something so it's cooked and broken down a lot better, and then reducing that raw exposure. So different diet and lifestyle stuff in the clinic for kids with eczema. Sometimes we're saying well-cooked stews and foods. Then that's amazing if you've got oxalates. Then you can still have those really gorgeous oxalate-rich foods, but then you've broken those down and made them easier to consume whilst reducing that consumption of those raw oxalates. In saying this, I now go into my second caveat of histamine. And this is why testing is so important, because histamine is toned to anything that's aged. So if you are doing a slow cooked, long aged bone broth.
Salami. What the fuck is going on with my brain today?
What is salami?
Salami!
So I always talk about this in the clinic as well. With babies, it's a lot easier to know if it's a histamine intolerance. If you're an adult, how do you feel after you have a glass of red wine and a salami and cheese board? A salumi. What did you say? Salami board. If you're getting... So histamine in adults, you're seeing sneezing, you're seeing headaches, rashes, allergies, all of that can be a sign of histamine. So, and you can also have a buildup, that histamine bucket that I think we spoke about in our last podcast. So this bucket can then overflow, and there's different bacteria in the gut which actually release histamine, and they produce histamine as well. So it could just be that tinned tomatoes, that spaghetti that you're having that week that puts the skin into a big flare. So I've seen kids with eczema that even having tomatoes, spaghetti, that they then get a huge red face. Strawberries can be quite high in histamine.
Aged meats, cheese are the most common triggers for histamine. The one thing I love about histamine though is it's something you can treat, and you can fully clear the bacteria responsible to then re-implement histamine.
Completely reintroduce histamine.
And so the other thing worth remembering though is sometimes we might do that and then the histamine's still a problem. Why? MTHFR. Because remember, MTHFR links with increasing histamine levels in the body. So if we're noticing that we're doing gut microbiome work and we're reducing histamines, and then we're re-implementing once the bacteria is cleared and we're still having triggers to histamine, then we know that it's probably going to be a gene like MTHFR causing a histamine response as well, that we then need to go and treat and regulate the actual gene responsible, which is a big trigger as well.
Yeah. So yeah, histamine's usually...
That's why it's like a puzzle. Eczema's like a puzzle.
Yeah.
You do one thing and it might get better, but then it'll come back. Okay, well then it might be the gene causing a histamine response as well.
And there's a few markers to know if it's MTHFR. A lot of the clinical questioning, we can go, okay, it's seeming like an MTHFR picture, and that's usually why we're suggesting to check MTHFR as well. So yeah, covering gluten, histamine, and oxalates. So yeah, high histamine foods, tomato, salami, wine, aged cured meats, even cooking a meal for dinner, keeping those leftovers and then having it the next day increases its histamine content. And the really good foods that are toned for gut health, so things like bone broth, kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha.
All high in histamine.
All high in histamine because they're all aged and fermented. So any fermented foods are then higher in histamine as well. And that's, I see so many adults and children in the clinic, I'm doing all the right things. I'm giving them bone broth. I'm giving them their probiotics through.
So if you notice your kids are getting worse, at the time of like probiotic supplementation, doing probiotic foods in the diet and doing lots of gut lining work, then you know that it's histamine. Also, a lot of kids will do lots of like gut lining work and all of that at the time of introduction of foods. And if you like, a lot of kids will, their mum's first foods will be a sauerkraut and bone broth. If you notice eczema comes on the time of introduction of solids, okay, it's probably going to be histamines.
Yeah, and that's really important because as this new wave of introducing different foods and you're wanting to modulate that microbiome, if you're seeing that come through, then yeah, I'd be diving deeper, doing a gut microbiome, seeing if there's that histamine producing bacteria present, if there's inflammation, and be able to clear this out and recolonize with beneficial bacteria before then bringing in those foods, because those foods are gorgeous. And there's a lot of misconception here about what's good foods and what's not good foods, and understanding where your child or where you are in your own health is really important to know what foods to eat.
Yeah, and what I think would be a good thing to remember is don't remove salicylates, oxalates, and histamines altogether, because then you're going to never know what your child's triggers is. If you really want to work on removing one of these food groups or all of them to figure out what your child or you are reacting to, then what I would recommend is doing like 2 weeks of salicylates, then reintroduce, and then do 2 weeks of histamine, and then stop, and then reintroduce and do the oxalates, instead of removing all those food groups all at once. Or see a naturopath who can actually tell you what one it is.
Yeah.
Because it might be histamine you might remove, and it could be the trigger, but it's only 15% better, because then you're not regulating the MTHFR gene at the same time.
And that's also very good as well, because if you're removing high histamine foods, we often see that oxalate component go up, because low histamine food, which is like almond milk. So if you're swapping into a low histamine food for almond milk, we're then seeing oxalates rise. And then if the skin actually worsens from pulling back that, then we know that the oxalates are at play more as well. So there is benefits to removing to understand if you're not going through all of that, but working with a naturopath is the easiest way, and working with competent naturopaths that understand these food triggers is really beneficial as well.
The other thing to keep in mind also is, if you're just doing it on your own, you're removing the food groups, great, you're not causing the eczema anymore, but you're not actually treating the problem that's caused it, which is the bacteria in the stomach again, or other triggers like a gene defect, or other triggers like a heavy metal imbalance, which I'll talk about in detail soon.
Yeah, and I have a lot of mums in the first appointment say, all right, so which foods should I remove? And there are times where I'm like, I don't know if this is histamine or if this is oxalates. And I go, keep everything the exact same. We'll get these results and then we'll go from there. So that we're not removing those foods and then having to reintroduce them, and then that child not then wanting those. So I like to see everything at absolute base level. If it's not clean cut, with eczema, it isn't often clean cut. And then that gives us the most information to give the most targeted action treatment and get those results that we get, because we do have eczema clearance really quickly in the clinic.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're the main ones. And then salicylates. So salicylates are endogenous as well. So salicylates are in a lot of conventional sprays, creams, body washes. So it's like SLS and all of that. A lot of those are going more SLS free. Salicylate intolerance is once again easy to see in adults. So how do you feel if you have aspirin? Aspirin is quite high in salicylates, so it can be salicylates there as well. Salicylates does go in with histamine a lot as well. In all honesty, I'd say salicylates is one of the least impacting ones that I see within the clinic. It's more often than not histamine contributing bacteria from the gut, and then oxalates, and it seems to be in that order is the trend I'm currently seeing at the moment.
Yep. Now we need to talk a bit more about, I'll go over nutritional deficiencies and heavy metals, but if you wanted to touch base a bit more on immune dysregulation or chronic stress as triggers as well.
Yep. So chronic stress is one of the worst things that you could be undergoing for your overall gut health. So as you're more stressed, you're upregulating inflammation throughout your body and you're driving down that beneficial bacteria. What do you eat when you're stressed? Brooke, what do you eat when you're stressed?
Chocolate.
So a lot of these inflammatory sugar-based foods is what everybody goes to. So if you're having a really bad, stressful day, you're going to go home and make a salad? No. Pretty much nobody does.
And then they're also higher in those
oxalates and histamines,
oxalates.
yeah. But you are usually having worse foods, and then that's going to impact your gut microbiota, your gut health.
Your nutritional stores as well, which then impacts skin cell regeneration and turnover.
Yeah, so stress is a huge thing. There's not 1 week that doesn't go by that I talk about stress in the clinic, and a lot of our lifestyle implements are quite beneficial at modulating that stress. So even when I'm addressing eczema with liquid herbs, I'm always looking at like something like withania, bacopa, passion flower, some quality magnesium to support that adrenal gland function and make sure that that stress, even though sometimes these kids are what does a 1-year-old have to stress about? But it's that external factors that can contribute to stress and then picking
Changes
up on
in
that as well.
routine, split parents, that type of thing.
So we've also got a bit of an immune dysregulation picture when it comes to eczema as well. So this can be IgE, IgA, or IgG. So IgG, we have a delayed reaction to foods. Whenever I've run an IgG test to remove these foods for the children with eczema, they usually partner up quite closely with histamine. IgA is a food that you're consuming that's then damaging to the gut lining as well. So these can be really beneficial to remove to address that eczema and the underlying eczema as well. And IgE is something that you're more anaphylactic to. So you can also have external allergens with the IgE reaction as well. So things like dust, dander, mold, pollen, all of those more seasonal allergies can be triggered from, I do have a client that's allergic to grass as well, and we've optimized her gut and there's been a very reduced reaction to grass as well. And then we've also got, so you've got a bit of a allergen immune picture through family. So you can also pass that down through family history as well. So picking up in clinical questioning, does anybody else have eczema? When did the eczema heal? Do you have any allergies or intolerances? So there's different bacteria in the gut which can trigger the onset of eczema, which if left unchecked can actually lead to allergies as well.
Portobello is a big one, staph's a big one, strep's a big one.
So that's a big reason to look into the gut, and
you don't want to make it worse by leaving it untreated.
Yeah, and that's, I have a lot of mums that say their eczema cleared at 4, but now they've got allergies and they're 10 and they've got allergies, they've got inflammation, they're now going to the GP, they're getting their tonsils and adenoids removed because of this internal inflammation, because that underlying root cause of that eczema was never fully addressed. So that's why a really amazing initial intake with a naturopath is really beneficial, because we're putting together pieces of the puzzle. So when you see the GP, you get 10 minutes. They don't know all of these pieces. They're not going through your gut health, your family history, nervous system health, all of that, and immune health, to be able to understand that as well.
I think the big thing people have got to remember is, like, you might be treating just a condition of eczema right now, but you're also preventing allergies, or you're preventing asthma, or you're preventing something in the future actually coming on, because you're treating the actual root problem of all the conditions that link up. So I think that's, so key to remember as well. It's not just that one thing you're treating. I wanted to touch a little bit more now on a bit more about heavy metals and nutrients. So in regards to nutrients, the biggest thing that I find is, one, there's some nutrients that support clearance of histamine, clearance of oxalates, clearance of salicylates, things like zinc. So if we have those in low levels, it's going to impact the elimination of these byproducts, compounds. I would probably say
minerals,
minerals are the right word. And then what we also got to remember is we need skin cell regeneration and turnover to occur really well to clear the eczema too. So if our skin cells aren't regenerating properly, then we're going to have delayed healing of that skin and the eczema. So a lot of times I'll see a lot of kids that have low levels of things like vitamin D, of zinc, and then high levels of copper, which are then causing that worsened eczema presentation. So I actually had a client that came in and we did our microbiome report, and we had about a 30% improvement once treating the microbiome. When we've only got a 30% improvement, I know that there's something else triggering it that I haven't found yet. So I did some more digging, and we actually did a hair test, and we found that they had zinc deficiency and really, really high copper levels. Copper impacts zinc absorption, and then zinc is used it's the number one nutrient for skin cell regeneration and turnover. We weren't getting any more eczema triggers. We just had a big eczema presentation underneath our eyes that was not healing at all. And so I thought, okay, this will be the best type of thing to test. And so we tested and found the high copper, low zinc. So I worked on clearing that high copper out with lots of dandelion root and turmeric. And then I also used some NaC and a heavy metal binder to clear that out. And then I worked on increasing zinc levels, and then we had that skin cell regeneration and turnover correct itself, and the client no longer had any eczema and no eczema triggers, because we treated the microbiome, which was an awesome case to find the other 70% factor that was causing it not to essentially heal and regenerate.
And just going back to something you said there about vitamin D as well, so maternal stores of vitamin D are known to reduce the risk of a child then developing atopic dermatitis within the first 12 months of their life. So this is another me going down on my tangent of preconception health and making sure that you're having your pathology checked and analysed through a naturopath. So making
your
sure
vitamin D at least over 100.
Yeah, especially for preconception, because you're going to be passing that vitamin D stores down to your child, and same with your iron stores. So baby will take an iron download for their first 100 days of life. So making sure that you're nutritionally replete. I feel like this is going to be that one thing that I say in every podcast. Make sure that you have your vitamin D checked. Don't underestimate the power of vitamin D. And even though we live in Australia, we have the worst UV conversion of vitamin D. So, and most of the time when we're out in the sun, we're covering up. So you need cholesterol and good forms of fat to absorb and convert your vitamin D. And that is also through the liver as well. So making sure that your liver is functioning really well. But the best exposure sites for absorption of vitamin D is where your skin has the most fat content. So upper legs, upper thighs, belly is usually the part. It's usually the part. Jesus.
It's true,
the parts that you need to be showing off to get that conversion. Most of the time we're not showing off that in the public. And based on where you are, there's that UV conversion as well. So there's an amazing app that I recommend a lot called D-Minder. And that shows you where you are in the world and then how much vitamin D you'll convert within being outside in 15 minutes of sun. So I also talk through people that were put on a vitamin D supplementation during pregnancy, and I'm like, okay, amazing. Which form? They're on a good form. Okay, so how much are you taking? 1,000 IUs. So 1,000 IUs is equivalent to about 10 minutes in the sun. So it's not going to be enough to get that vitamin D from 51 up to 100, 120, 150 prior to preconception. So that's when you start going up for higher doses and working through with your naturopath on that if you need an activated vitamin D as well.
Yeah. And another thing to keep in mind besides heavy metals and nutrients is leaky gut. So leaky gut, also coined as intestinal permeability, is something that is going to drive inflammation, and we can also have inflammation through calprotectin, another marker we look at in the microbiome, that can cause trigger. That can be a trigger to eczema as well. So it can also be leaky gut as a trigger for your child's eczema. So that's something that you want to start repairing and looking at, as well as reducing that internal inflammation. The other thing to remember is, again, where are we absorbing our nutrients? In the stomach lining. So if the stomach lining is damaged and those cells aren't working adequately to absorb nutrients, then your child's skin cell regeneration or turnover is not going to occur properly, and then that might be causing delayed healing with the actual eczema too.
And then also looking further as well, as we talk about microbiomes, your skin also has its own microbiome. So working through diet and lifestyle treatment advice, we're often trying to reacidify that skin layer, especially if staphylococcus is present. So that gives a bit of a yellowing to that eczema presentation as well. So reacidifying that skin and looking at making sure that products that you're using are eczema certified. Do you have a dust filter in the house? Are you drinking tap water? All of this is things that we look at as well for that endogenous allergen effects as well. What soap powders are you using? What dishwashing detergents are you using? What soap in the bath is being used as well? How often are sheets washed? All of this can impact that skin layer and that skin microbiome as well.
So if you're wanting eczema-friendly swaps, everything's on our online store as well, which we've had because we've had to recommend it to so many clients that we've just been able to stock it to make it more accessible when they're ordering prescriptions. They can do add-ons, which we find really, really helpful. So if you're wanting to look into that, they're all really, really good for eczema, and they're removing those chemical components which also trigger eczema. Another thing to keep in mind is I was trying to remember what I was going to say.
This is my biggest thing in this podcast. I'm just like, where was my brain going?
Things, yeah, because we just don't want to miss anything, and there's that much that comes to eczema. Another thing to keep in mind is, again, our external health is a reflection of our internal health, and another thing that to keep in mind is our detoxification and elimination. So things like all skin conditions like eczema and acne can be a product from having high toxins in the body and them not eliminating properly. So we want to look at our liver pathways, like our beta-glucuronidase, which is seen in a microbiome map, will show us if that is really, really high, which is causing toxins and daily things that our body's trying to get rid of, chemicals. They're not clearing out of the body properly. We're not clearing them out of the adequate pathways. They're building up and they're actually causing the eczema presentation as well. So you actually need to make sure those pathways are working properly. We're having bowel movements nice and regularly. We don't have any MTHFR, and if we do, if we're helping with that regulation of that methylation pathway, we're working with regulating beta-glucuronidase if it's an issue. And again, remembering that our harmful bacteria that we have in the stomach releases LPS, liposaccharides, which can cause eczema because they're not clearing out properly if we're not clearing them out adequately.
They're really inflammatory as well, and can contribute to that systemic inflammation, which then comes out through the skin.
Yeah. So they're all our known triggers that we work with in eczema in the clinic, so literally over 10 things. But in regards to, besides that, I think what we should do is we should we've already listed some foods that are histamines, oxalates, salicylates. You can go online and find those foods and then try and eliminate them if you want to do that on your own. But again, you're not treating that root cause. We give you guys some tips with eczema too and some things to look at swapping out. But before that we do that, let's go through a little case with eczema. If you wanted to share a case that you've gone through, because I've already shared the case that I have treated with that amazing treatment from working on the microbiome and heavy metals.
Yeah, so I've actually got two. I'm going to run through them quite briefly because they're varying stages of life. One was a child under 1 and one was an 8-year-old child. So I'll start with the 8-year-old child. She was a little bit more clean cut. We got results really quickly. It was a standard gut microbiome. Well, I got good results for both of them really quickly. I shouldn't undersell that. So the older one, this little girl, always had itchy arms, itchy legs, had the eczema covering those normal hot spots, as well as, her legs. She didn't ever like to wear shorts or skirts because she didn't want to show it off. Different fabrics as well agitated her. And mum always thought that this was the ongoing trajectory of her life, that she was always going to have eczema. So she came in to see me in the clinic, and we did a gut microbiome map to this. We found one bacterial overgrowth and one parasite. So this parasite was Dientamoeba fragilis. And this was in quite low levels, and the bacteria was in quite low levels as well. Usually when I'm seeing a parasite and then seeing a disruption of stomach acid pH, because that parasite's trying to make the body as hospitable as possible, which then means that we can't break down foods as effectively as well. So that's going to impact those foods that you're consuming. One of these bacteria present was Protivella. And so we went through and we did a clearance of this whilst reducing some histamine-based foods as well. So we reduced histamine-based foods for about 10 weeks. So things like tomatoes, bone broth,
aged meats,
cheese. So mum was giving bone broth every day. So we removed those and then we went ahead and continued. I saw her again 5 weeks after starting initial treatment. She was on liquid herbs that included pomegranate, bakel skullcap, and nettle to downregulate the histamine production as well. I also had her on some EPA, DHA fish oils to support that vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E component as well, and we supported her overall gut function and detoxification pathways. When she came back to see me in her return appointment, the eczema was 80% cleared already just based off of that. It was really good. So we went on to
such a good outcome so quickly.
Yeah, so that was kind of covering the bacteria, opening up detoxification pathways, and then going into reducing and removing that parasite as well. And then we went through recolonizing with beneficial bacteria, specific prebiotics to feed up that low beneficial bacteria that was present there that's anti-inflammatory. And I saw her, I think maybe 10 weeks ago, and she'd been completely eczema free the entire time. And that was after about maybe 2 proper treatments, and we continued to make sure that we got through all those protocols so that she wasn't at risk of developing it.
Good.
Mum was absolutely stoked because she thought that this was the overall trajectory of her daughter's life.
So amazing. That's why I love treating children.
It was really, really nice because this is a little girl who is in grade 2, I think, grade 1 or grade 2. So she's starting out at school. The other kids at school don't have eczema. Like, she was being subconscious, and that's nothing that I ever want a girl to ever feel. So I was very, very stoked at that outcome.
Any child.
Yeah. And we had...
We want men to feel it though.
Yeah.
Just joking, by the way.
And then the other child that I saw was actually a baby, and we do see lots of babies with eczema in the clinic.
A lot.
And I know this is going to absolutely pop off with it being a risk and exposure site, but this mum thought that she was doing everything right with her birth experience, and she was breastfed and all of that. So she was actually born into water. So she was a home water birth, where you're exposed to, instead of the sterile hospital environment, you're exposed to the environment and you're born into water. So this is what I could put down to being a bit of a risk of different bacteria being present in the gut as well.
Unfortunately, we do see that we have a higher risk of bacterial overgrowth in kids born at water birth, like my son Sterling. It is a trigger, unfortunately, to reflux, colic, and bacterial overgrowth, which is a real shame because it's a great way to give birth. And I think that we need to work in combination to find a solution for this. Like, can we have a tap that is a Zazen water filter, but a mini version, so it's removing all the bacteria, the parasites that could be in the water that the baby's being born into. We need a solution for this.
And then maternal preconception health too, checking in vaginal microbiome, skin microbiome,
which
all of
passes
that.
on over.
It was definitely something. So this little baby had 9 different bacterial overgrowths in the gut and very low levels of beneficial bacteria as well.
Which is a lot of overgrowth.
Yeah, it was a lot of overgrowths. I was very daunted and overwhelmed with this case because I
still remember you actually sharing it with me.
I
felt so overwhelmed. I'm like, just because there's 9 doesn't mean that it's not going to be as quick to clear out.
Yeah, and mum and dad were both quite stressed because they didn't want their little girl. They didn't want this. They'd put in all the effort to make sure that everything was low tox, and they couldn't come up with any other reason as to why. So we did the gut microbiome, we saw that. We went in with strain specific probiotics, and then also eradicated with herbs based off of her age and weight. So it was completely safe to do so at the time. There was some streptococcus, there was some fuso, so I'm seeing some oral microbiome bacteria ending up in the gut. How is mum's oral microbiome health during pregnancy? Because any cuts within the gums will then go systemic throughout the entire body, and baby in uterine microbiota closely resembles oral microbiota as well. So making sure that I was checking through all of that and making sure that we're clearing the fuso, clearing out all of those different bacteria. We removed histamine-based foods for mum and bub because bub was still breastfeeding. Modulated mum's microbiome transfer to reduce that as well. And by the time I saw her next time, I think she had a little patch of red on her cheek, and that was all that was left. And this was a baby that had eczema covered head to toe. So I was so pleased with that. I was so excited that made my weekend when I saw that.
Yeah, 100%.
Because I think we said in our last podcast about feeling like you're a fake naturopath and having imposter syndrome. Yeah.
I don't feel good enough to treat this, but you did it.
And
it builds your confidence to do it again for the next case.
Yeah, and now it's something that
experience.
I feel very comfortable treating, and it's very. Yeah, once you have that experience and you've seen it and you've seen something and probably that gives you absolute overwhelm and you can work through it, makes it so much easier. So we got her back onto histamine foods. So she had full reintroduction of all histamine-based foods. And she has no eczema now. So it's fabulous.
Perfect. And then you're not having to remove those foods for the rest of their lives either. So they can have that life that doesn't feel like they're not having what their kids are having at birthday parties, their friends and whatnot. So I find that is always a long-term goal, but not always achievable for oxalates. But we find that there's no other limitations with other food groups.
Yeah. And even with oxalates, there are things that bind to oxalates, cooking them, having good levels of magnesium citrate and calcium citrate as well help to support the detoxification and clearance of oxalate buildup and within the body, so that you can have a little bit more of that oxalates as well. So it's not all doom and gloom for oxalates and having low oxalobacter. There's also strains of beneficial bacteria like Lactobacillus LGG,
which are protective against eczema.
And that helps to support the degeneration of oxalates as well. So there's quite a few different ones there. And there's lots of studies based on eczema now in the gut microbiome, which is fabulous.
Yeah. There's so much we can do to prevent it from coming on again as well after you've cleared out. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave a little question box today for anything else you want us to answer in regards to eczema, but we've pretty much looked over all the things that we would do in regards to looking at the causes. In regards to testing that, we'd look at, again, a microbiome report, a heavy metal report, a gene report.
Yeah, MTHFR, allergy testing, so that can be through blood or blood spot for certain foods that might be contributing to it with that delayed reaction, immediate anaphylactic reaction. Through the GP, you can get 4 IgE markers tested, bulk builds yearly, and that's, you can search it and you can see which ones it covers as well, but it's things like cashews, peanuts, dust, dander, mold, pollen, all of that as well, to see those endogenous ones, and then if it's anaphylactic reaction to different foods as well.
Yeah. So our key take-home tips for you guys to help with eczema would be, if you really wanting to find out what the triggers are, you can do diet removal, but not all at the same time. We wouldn't recommend. The other thing that you can do is looking at making all those swaps straight away, because again, chemicals aren't just harmful for eczema, but harmful for your internal body as well. So making those switches, which we have all on the Balance Beings online store.
Yeah.
What other tips would you say?
Having good support with eczema as well, because eczema is really hard, especially as a breastfeeding mum that has a child with eczema, because I see a lot of breastfeeding mums doing complete dietary removals, so making sure that you've got enough protein as well, because I see a lot of maternal mental health just completely diminish if they're breastfeeding a child with eczema, and it would be very, very hard and difficult. So making sure that you've got that good you've got that support if you're a breastfeeding mum with a child with eczema, doing those swaps, getting onto some good eczema association stuff. Mugu's fabulous.
And Mubuku have got that certification now,
Yeah.
I believe, on their products.
Yeah, so Mugu's,
Which I didn't see previously.
Yeah, Mugu's gorgeous. And yeah, you're not in it alone. Eczema is so common. And yeah, it's something that we see so often in the clinic, and we're all absolutely competent and excited to help your child be
And
on that
remember, it's not
eczema-free
forever.
journey. Yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We'll put a question box up if there's any other questions you want us to answer in regards to eczema, which we've also done for our previous podcast on kids with ADHD, autism, and behavioural issues. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for joining us on this week's Unhinged Health Journey.
May your days be balanced and your health be natural.